It's my privilege to welcome you to the Wednesday, June 10th meeting of the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners. This is our business meeting at 5:30. We had a work session regarding a presentation and discussion on COVID-19's impact on our jail populations and criminal justice processing. I do want to spend just a minute or two sharing with you how we do our Zoom meetings here. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share the screen with the call. Participants will not be able to view them without a computer, smartphone, or tablet. All participants will be entered into the meeting with their audio muted, meaning the commission and the public will not be able to hear you. Presenters will be unmuted when their agenda item comes up. And we ask that all online presenters use good conference call etiquette and mute their line when not speaking and introduce themselves each time they speak. If you have a public comment on the agenda item or under regular public comment, please use the raise your hand function on Zoom. Staff will call on you and unmute you. We ask that speakers give their names and address for the minutes. The county reserves the right to shut off the microphone and remove any speaker from the meeting if they're vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. The chat function has been disabled, and a recording of this meeting will be made available on our website after each meeting. With that, we'll move on to our first item, and I'd like to call on Commissioner Thellman if she would be kind enough to read a proclamation declaring June 15th, 2020 as Keith Browning Day in Douglas County. Commissioner Thellman is our longest tenured commissioner, and if she would be so kind to read this proclamation, I'm sure Keith and all of us here in Douglas County would really appreciate it.
I'm honored to do that, although I think you just called me old.
Nope, not at all, not old. Longest tenured.
The longest standing commissioner. I will take that, and I really am honored to read this because I think the world of Keith. He is a phenomenal director of public works and a phenomenal person, just as honest as he can be, and kind and thoughtful and fair and funny and calm in really hard situations. So I think it's right to recognize him, and I'm really kind of shocked that we're at this moment. I still am in a little bit of disbelief, but yeah, so I'll be happy to do this proclamation for Keith Browning Day in Douglas County, June 15th, 2020. Whereas the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County, Kansas recognized Keith Browning, Director of Public Works, for 32 years of service to Douglas County. Whereas as Director, Keith oversees an annual budget of $7 million, 57 employees who work for 2 divisions, operations and engineering, maintains 232 miles of roads in the unincorporated areas of Douglas County, 157 bridges, 1,057 culverts, Lone Star Lake, and 4 park sites. Whereas Keith became an engineer because he likes the flexibility of being able to work in a small town, big city, or rural area, and in addition, doing work that makes a difference in people's lives. During his career, Keith also worked for the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, the Coffee County Highway Department, and as a private engineer consultant with the Johnson County Public Works. Whereas during his career with Douglas County, Keith has worked in the basement of the courthouse, a former church building, and later helped establish the county's first LEED certified building at 3755 East 25th Street, creating a new public works and zoning and codes complex. Whereas as residents of Douglas County, we only have to look around the unincorporated area to see the many improvements to our county that we can attribute to Keith Browning leaving his mark. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County, Kansas, hereby proclaim June 15th, 2020, as Keith Browning Day in Douglas County. And we, the County Commissioners and 100,000 plus residents of Douglas County, thank Keith very, very much and we wish him a happy and well-deserved retirement. And adopted on this 10th day of June 2020, Board of County Commissioners. And I just want to say I got to help Keith with that development of the new Public Works campus, and that was a phenomenal load of work to put on someone who was already incredibly busy, and he guided that beautifully, and I think that campus is a real tribute to his leadership and his commitment to this county to do the very best. So there you go.
Thank you, Commissioner Thurman.
Thank you very much for everything. I mean, you unfortunately were my go-to guy for anything and everything for the last 4.5 years, even during my campaign, and you were probably one of the most patient people I have ever met. So thank you, and I wish you the best in your retirement.
And I'll just close and say, Keith, I haven't known you that long, but I got to meet Keith really when he presented to the Kansas Association of Counties for incoming commissioners, and boy, did he make Douglas County proud. And Keith is just such a fine human being. You know, the character of an organization is defined by its people, and we're defined by hardworking, committed, and just really tremendous people who work for Douglas County. And Keith is just such a great example of that. So thank you, Keith, and we look forward to celebrating Keith Browning Day on June 15th with you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say thanks. That's really super nice, and I want to thank you commissioners and really all the past commissioners. We've been blessed with having very good boards of county commissioners through the years and good administration, and really appreciate that. Really appreciate the fact that you all let us do our job and provide us the resources to do our job. That's extremely important, and we greatly appreciate that. And Commissioner Thurman, I especially want to thank you for your huge role in the new Public Works complex. You were, well, if it weren't for you, I don't think we'd have that. So appreciate that very much.
I hope before you leave, you sign your name on that rammed earth wall that ribbon, you know. I think that would be really appropriate. Somewhere kind of hidden.
Probably should.
My only other request would be to make sure that you teach Chad Voigt all you possibly can about curly leaf pondweed, because that's going to haunt him too, no doubt.
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will.
All right. Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
So moving on to our consent agenda, we have 4 items on our consent agenda. Does any commissioner wish to remove an item from the consent agenda?
No.
No?
Nope.
And for those of you who are on the Zoom call or at the Douglas County Courthouse, just to let you know how we do this, if you're at the courthouse, you let Sarah Plinsky know. She's there with a computer and a link to our Zoom call. And if you're on the call, on the Zoom call, we ask that you just use the raise your hand function. But I will ask if any member of the public has an item that's on the consent agenda that they would like to have removed. Sarah, anyone there at the courthouse?
No one here.
Okay. And Jill Jolliker is monitoring our Zoom call. Anyone, Jill?
Not that I can see, no.
Okay, thank you, Jill. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously 3-0. We'll move on to our regular agenda items. And our first item is to consider rejecting bids for Pavement maintenance project number 2020-06 and authorization to solicit bids for a reduced project scope. And I believe, is this Chad, Sarah, or is this Keith?
I'll take it, Commissioner
Thanks,
Kelly.
Keith.
This is Keith. So it's fairly well explained in the agenda item report, but we opened bids. We got 3 bidders. All bidders were above the engineer's estimate, pretty substantially, actually. We recommend rejecting all bids. We would recommend reducing the scope of the project and concentrating on the 2 miles of Route 1029 between N750 Road and N950 Road and rebidding that. We think that will be well within our budgeted amount for this work.
Thank you, Keith. Any questions from commissioners?
No.
No, seeing none. This is a regular agenda item, so it's up for public comment. Is there any member there at the courthouse, Sarah, who would like to comment on our first item?
I don't have anyone here.
Thank you. Jill, anyone on the call?
Not that I can see.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and make a motion to consider rejecting bids open June 3rd, 2020 for project number 2020-06 and authorizing Public Works to solicit bids for a reduced project scope limited to pavement rehabilitation on Route 1029 from North 750 Road to North 950 Road.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate that.
Thanks, commissioners.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
We'll move on to our second item, which is the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority Project ABLE funding request. And I believe I see Shannon Oury and Jill Jolliker. I think, is this Jill?
Yep.
Hi, Jill.
Good evening, commissioners. I went ahead and did a share screen of the briefing sheet just so we have it in front of us for reference. But as I explained in the background information, one of the very few permanent supportive housing programs that we have available in our specialty housing toolkit in Douglas County is Project ABLE, and historically that has been managed by the Salvation Army of Douglas County. And this is for a permanent supportive housing program for chronically homeless individuals and families with disabilities. This provides 14 units of for extremely low income households with disabilities, and again, a history of chronic homelessness and at high risk to return to homelessness. It's very convenient that we have Matthew Falk is on this on the agenda as well, providing the helping me cover the next agenda item, because Matthew works closely with the clients of Project ABLE as one of the case management as Burton provides case management for, I want to say at least half or close to half of the clients that are served by through Project ABLE. And the heart of the program is a housing subsidy for those clients through private landlords in private units, and with case management services either provided by Salvation Army or Burton. When it was communicated and shared to the community providers like Burton that Project ABLE Salvation Army would no longer be able to fund Project ABLE beginning next month because of a loss of funding through the continuum of care balance of state funding. Matthew very quickly raised a red flag of concern and got the attention of a group of us, and we were able to pull together a conversation with Shannon Oury and Nikki Danicky from the Housing Authority and Sarah Plinsky and I, and real quickly tried to problem solve, recognizing that we could not afford to lose these 14 units. And we feel like we've come up with a game plan that over the next year, if we stabilize with funding, that I'm very pleased to report is going to be matched, I believe, by the City of Lawrence as the recommendation by the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. And I believe Ron Gacius is dialed into the call as well, and I think he sent you a communication that I included in the agenda packet, because I think he also, and the Affordable Housing Advisory Board, based on Shannon's recommendation and update, really also recognize that these are critical tools in our toolkit. So what we've proposed is for Douglas County to provide half of the annual cost to the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority to pick up administration of this program for the next year, with that additional funding coming from the city funds, with the intent that the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority will apply for continuum of care dollars in the next grant cycle. And we have a fair amount of confidence that that they will be successful in that effort, but if they're not, we may be back before you. But for now, we really feel like this is a win-win. And at this point, you know, I want to let Shannon talk a little bit about any of the plans that they have for this program and the role that they'll be playing. And Shannon, you may need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Unmute. Did that work?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, great. Yeah, so we have not been at the Housing Authority. Wait, I should say Shannon Oury, Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority. We have not been involved in this Project ABLE. It's not something that we have worked on, but we have another very similar program called the Hope House that we already received the same type of grant for. And that we have administered, I guess we're going on 14, 15 years. So we're very aware of what is required to handle this type of grant. This grant that was not renewed will terminate at the end of June. And what those of us who during the COVID-19 pandemic are well aware of is that none of these families will be able to afford the rent for their unit on their own. And so there's a very high likelihood of all of them becoming homeless again. As you guys know, because I've appeared before you before, is that Housing Authority generally has 400 to 500 people on its waiting lists. And it generally takes us 12 to 18 months from the minute you get on our list to house you. So there was no way for the Housing Authority just has no emergency where we could slot these families into one of our existing programs. So as we started working on this, the request is basically for the city and the county to help us get these families to keep them housed until they can either get on our waiting list and move up and receive some type of voucher for us, or, as Jill was talking about, the Housing Authority can request funding again for this program through the normal balance of state continuum of care cycle. So we basically, even if that grant were unsuccessful, all of these families we will put on our waiting list so that that it'll be seamless for them. They will be able to stay in their current units, and we would just basically issue them a voucher and keep them housed. You know, as Jill probably has given you updates on the human services side of the emergency management, the shelter is not going to take any more families, and there really is nowhere for them to go. And so the Housing Authority, because this is what we do, we just said, if we can get the money, I will figure out a way to pay for the housing assistance and the rent for these families until we can come up with a better longer term solution. So that's what we're trying to do. I think you probably saw the funding request, but I always think it's really important to mention that there are 12 children involved in these households. You know, this would be to have all 27 of these individuals become homeless, would be just, you know, really truly a horrifying outcome for sort of where they started and where they've come to. Many of these families and households have been housed for numerous years and are a real success for getting households out of homelessness into being housed. So I'm happy to take any questions. You know, the numbers are based on finishing out this year and the current rent that is being requested.
Thanks, Shannon. We'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions from commissioners?
No.
Yeah.
Shannon, you seem to know these families pretty well. I would just ask, you know, there's so much discussion, and rightfully so, about inequities racially in our communities. Can you give us any background on that? I know a little bit of this because I heard this presentation at the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. Can you share a little bit with the commission?
Yes. Luckily, Ron asked that question. Ron Gage has asked that question, and we do have that information. So we have in this population that we would be helping 6 Black, African American, and 4 American Indian or Native American, and the remainder are white.
And Shannon, I know you're familiar with the Douglas County Health Equity Report. We do recognize that housing is an inequity across Douglas County. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So this starts to, when you point to those things that we're trying to do to address those inequities, this would be one of them. Am I connecting the dots correctly?
You are.
Okay.
I also think it's fair to say, and you know, Bob might be itching to say this, and Matthew as well, but one of the inequities that we've been aware of in the behavioral health plank of the community health plan is the need for supportive housing for populations that are suffering from mental illness, behavioral health, substance abuse, physical disabilities, and the low number of permanent supportive housing units that we have are just pales in comparison to the need. And thankfully, we have the cottages coming online soon, but that would have been just the tragedy of losing Project Able units, in that just the time that we have the cottages coming online, we would lose the existing capacity, the capacity we have. So just when we'd start to make gains, we'd lose it.
Can I take one thing, Jill, on that?
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when I first started in this role, and Jill and Matthew were sort of doing a lot of the groundwork along with Shannon and sort of really bringing our knowledge base up to what capacity we have in the community, and then looking at that from a standpoint of where we need to go. We've visited with the folks from Salvation Army and the Project Able team about this project, and it was one of the first things that I walked away from in my role feeling like, here's something in the community that really works, that makes sense, that is affordable, and that meets a need in ways we should be replicating this model because it is such a good model and it's been so effective. So when the red flag went up from Matthew about the fact that because of a funding snafu, this program was in jeopardy of collapsing, and we would lose, Matthew, I think it was like 60% of this type of housing with one move like this. I think that's really was the rallying cry to figure out if there's anything we can do to save this and to support this. So I think that Matthew and Shannon and Jill, and they've done a tremendous job of trying to find a really reasonable solution here. We have capacity within behavioral health projects to support this. This is exactly the type of thing that is aligned with our strategic plan with the Behavioral Health Leadership Coalition. So I just want to affirm and validate that in terms of the model, the viability of it. The problem here is that they lost a funding source with no warning, and we can get involved here in ways that will ensure that that stays stable, and that we can continue to do this type of work to serve the people in our community who have this type of need.
Thank you, Bob. I did have one more question just for clarity, Sarah. This is actually coming out of, the request is to come out of 2 budget cycles. So it has 26,500 out of this year's behavioral health projects. And we haven't done our budget for next year. So we're really tonight only committing half the funds for this. Is that correct?
Yes, and Bob or Jill, correct me if I'm wrong here. I think in terms of where we're at in the budget, we've identified funds in the behavioral health equipment reserve funds that were transferred at the end of the first year of our behavioral health work to pay for this. So while half the funds will come this year and half the funds will come next year, these funds are already allocated in our budget through that equipment reserve process. So Bob and
we
Jill.
identified those funds as they're one-time, the equipment reserve funds are one-time funds for one-time purposes. And so we thought that that was a great fit for this. The one thing I'd say too is Salvation Army, I think the loss of this grant is largely a reflection of not out of any malfeasance or mismanagement on their part. I think it's more of a capacity issue as them as an organization right now. And I think that they are incredibly grateful and heartened that we are picking up at least the regional divisional director of housing services is incredibly grateful that we're picking this up, and they did not want to lose it. But I think the organizational capacity to manage the grants just is not present right now. They've had some turnover in their staff, and unfortunately that turnover resulted in necessary documentation and grant reporting not being fulfilled in time. And unfortunately that hurt their scores in terms of how those grants are scored and funded. And as Shannon can attest and Matthew can attest, the compliance and reporting with those grants will eat your lunch. And if you don't have the capacity in an organization to do that, it's not going to happen. So I think Salvation Army is very happy to see this happen. And it's unfortunate things worked out this way, but I think on the plus side, with Housing Authority's track record of successfully moving families and individuals, even families and individuals with the complexity of issues that these folks have, they've got a track record of successfully moving those folks on to sometimes just to out to other places in the community where they can be just as successful. But if not, they can support them where they are.
Yeah, so this is Sarah. Jill, I agree, and I thank you for adding that on. And I just want to also add my thanks to Shannon Oury and the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority and that team. We really now, with this change, which happened out of kind of a really immediate situation to need to step in and resolve, we now have really aligned a lot of our supportive, most of our, if not all, our supportive housing in this community through either partnerships with the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority and or us at Douglas County. And so I feel that we're on much more stable ground in terms of our capacity to help continue to ensure that that funds can be identified to support this need in the future.
Thank you, Sarah. If we don't have any more questions, this is a public hearing item, so we're going to take public comment on this item, and I think I see Ron Gouches is here. He submitted a letter. Don't know if he wishes to speak. Sarah, is there anyone in the courthouse who'd like to speak on this item?
I don't have any speakers.
I'll check in with Jill. Use that raise your hand function if you'd like to speak on this item.
I'm not seeing any. Ron, if you had anything to say, you wanted to say, if you'd raise your hand, but if not, no worries, but I'm not seeing anybody else.
Okay, so we'll close public comment on this item, bring it up to the commission for discussion and motion, if any.
If there aren't any questions, I'll make a motion. I'm sorry, Commissioner Thelman, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was going to ask that maybe we could get back to the pictures rather than the screen to kind of be able to see each other as we have our conversation. But I'm ready. I'm ready to. Oh, there we are. I'm ready for a vote, but I just. Since there aren't any public comments to make, I just would add my just gratitude to all of the characters who made this fall into place so quickly, and including Ron and the Affordable Housing Board, who they are really coming through. I mean, this is not normal stuff. This is fast, generous, thoughtful, and it's necessary, and that doesn't always happen with special boards and special funds. So we're really grateful to everybody. But I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me to make the motion. So if somebody would.
I don't anymore either since Jill.
Yeah, sorry.
I have it here in front of me. I can do this one. And I'll just say, you know, I'm just so pleased with the work that Jill is doing, sort of coordinating our human services folks. You know, to be able to identify for us and give us confidence in the work that's being done by these human service partners is just so critical. It's so easy to want to say, oh, it must have been mismanaged or we must have screwed this up. But to bring people together quickly to work with Matthew and Shannon and get it to the Affordable Housing Advisory Board and see that partnership happen, hopefully when the city approves it at their next meeting, between the city and the county, is the way that we will really make progress on these big issues in Douglas County. So Jill, thank you for your work. Shannon, thank you for stepping up in so many ways. You're becoming a regular at our meetings and we like to see that. Ron, thank you for continuing to advocate. Ron is doing a superb job chairing the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. It's really exceptional, and just thanks to everyone. Matthew, thank you, and Bob as well. So I'm glad to make the motion to approve a request for the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority for $26,500 in fiscal year 2020 funding to support Project ABLE Permanent Supportive Housing Program.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That approves 3-0. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Shannon. Matt and Bob. Okay. Our next item is a lease agreement with Burton Community Mental Health. And for this item, we're glad to welcome up Jill Jolliker again.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before you is a lease agreement that looks a lot like the lease agreement that we have already approved in the past with the Lawrence Douglas County Housing Authority. It's a long-term lease for the Burton transitions transitional housing facility that is currently under construction on the behavioral health campus. Any background information, we gave you an update of where the project, the capital expenses are on this project today. We also gave you, and I want to highlight on here and kind of give a little mini celebration. I think it was like 2 months ago, maybe, Matthew. Matthew was, Burton Ash was notified that they received this $400,000 Sunderland Family Foundation grant, which is a really big deal. From this family foundation to help support the capital expenses associated with transitions. You know, the lease is fairly straightforward. Burton Ash is going to manage the operations of the facility, providing those transitional housing supports to 10 to 12 individuals in the months that in the beginning months that transitions is open. 2 of those beds will be set aside as crisis beds while we're waiting for the crisis center to be opened up. And we can talk about that in greater detail if there's questions. I kind of gave you an outline of the operating expenses and where those are at. We talked about those with the commission back in March or April, I believe. And we've come a long way in terms of where the operating expenses are and coming really nicely in line with Douglas County's and expected commitment to the annual operating expenses beginning in 2021. One of the things you may note in the lease agreement is that the maintenance of the facility is going to be, it stays with the landlord, which would be Douglas County. So what has begun between the Housing Authority and Burton Ash is working out some of the elements of what it would look like to have an agreement between the Housing Authority to provide that maintenance for the property on the campus. And we did set aside that $115,000 annually to offset those expenses. And the agreement is elements of developing that agreement are underway. And the programming and planning about how to start operating that facility and identifying how those folks will transition in and transition out. Conversations continue on a monthly basis, and you know, Matthew is here to provide any updates about their work as the organization prepares for this new facility to open, and answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Jill. Matthew, do you have any comments or just here to answer questions?
I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions, commissioners?
So I don't have any questions. I got to have a ringside seat for this conversation when the transitions house was called Tier 2 and when it was just an idea. And I know that to reach this moment where we're signing leases and we have, you know, serious agreements on the operations and costs, and because everybody agrees what everybody's role is and how much everybody has contributed. I just think this is a really big moment. It's been a long time coming, and it wasn't easy. It's a lot for everyone to figure out and come to the end with a full collaborative understanding. So my hats off to the folks at Burton Ash. Hats off to Bob and to all of the staff who just kept at it and put it together until the numbers really worked. It was hard, and it looks like it's just really turning out very, very well. And I'm grateful for all of the extra work and extra thoughtfulness that went into this. Anxious to see that facility open up.
This is Sarah, I was just hoping to add two quick things for the commission and for the public's consideration. Along those lines of what Commissioner Thellman said in terms of all the hard work that's gone into this, we'd be remiss if we didn't again recognize Jill's contributions to this. The move towards housing with this behavioral health campus model, she really was a starting point and a continuation point and a driver for that conversation. So thank you, Jill, for all your work that you have done to shepherd this all through. And we've got still a little bit, we gotta get through the budget. The budget process is where we will see the operating expenses along with all the other behavioral health projects. But I just thank you, Jill, for your work on this. I would say too, I've had a conversation just in the last couple of days with Jay Zimmershed, our Director of Capital Projects, and we're kind of thinking of a late July, early August update to the Board of County Commissioners, just on so you can touch base on the construction at the behavioral health campus, see kind of how things will be really the progress we've made in terms of tier 2, tier 3, and we're going to be close to estimates on Turning Point, the crisis center at that point. So I don't think I can sneak it in before budget, and it'd be good to get a little bit more information in, but I think late summer you'll get an update on the construction and the capital.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that.
If I could just make a comment, it's not really on this, but it does have to do with this. I had a conversation just yesterday with a psychology professor at a Board of Regents school in the state of Kansas. And somehow during the conversation, it came up that I was county commissioner, and the exchange was, I mean, this guy couldn't believe it. He was like head over heels about complimenting how the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners is a state leader, a leader in the state on what they're doing for mental health, and a role model and all the great things that we're doing. But he said it's just really impressive to have a Board of County Commissioners that's so supportive of it. And as well, he complimented Burton and the great work that they do. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to share those compliments.
Thank you, Commissioner Druso. This is a public hearing item, so we'll open it up to the public. I haven't done that, right? I just want to make sure. I don't think I've done that yet. So do we have any member of the public there at the courthouse, Sarah, that would like to speak on this item?
I don't have any speakers.
Jill, anyone online who wanted to speak on this item? Okay.
Nope.
Bring it back for motions. And Jill's left it up there in case anyone would like to make a motion on this.
Sorry.
Item.
Sorry.
Jinxed you, Jill.
So I'm happy to make a motion. I move that we approve the lease agreement between Douglas County and Burton Community Mental Health Center for Transitions, a transitional housing facility located on the Douglas County Behavioral Health Campus.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I'd just add, this is partnerships at its best, folks. This is how we get these things done. And it's just really great to see everyone working together. And I want to echo Commissioner Thellman's, partnerships are not easy. They are hard. They require loss and every angle of it, but it's a gain for a greater good. So really appreciate that. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0. Thank you. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Matt, for being here. Thank you, Bob. We'll move on to appointments. I don't believe we have any appointments this evening, do we? No. Now we'll move on to general public comment. General public comment is at the end of each meeting with a limit of 1 comment per person. The commission reserves the right to place a time limit of 3 minutes per speaker if desired. Individuals may not give their unused time to any of their speakers. As a general practice, the commission will not discuss or debate, nor commission make any decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. All comments should be directed to the county commission. And as I mentioned earlier, in our new world of Zoom and social distance county commission meetings, if there's anyone at the courthouse, Sarah, for public comment, seeing none. Jill, is there anyone raising their hand hoping to provide public comment in the Zoom call?
I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay. That said, we'll close public comment. And now it's time for Commissioner and or Administrator Miscellaneous, and we usually start with Sarah at this point of our meeting.
Commissioners, thank you. You have a weekly memo in your packet, and it's online. I believe we've gotten it uploaded. Not yet, but we will. I'm really excited to be able to talk to the commissioners about the first round of the State CARES Act funding. The Governor's Spark Commission met earlier this week and has begun to release plans for how they intend to release the federal government's CARES Act funding down to the communities in Kansas. The first round of the State CARES Act funding will come to counties. Johnson County and Sedgwick County received their allocations directly from the federal government because of their size. The other 103 counties in Kansas will receive their funding from the state with the balance of funds that were sent to them. There's a lot we don't know yet about this. So I am willing to answer any questions that the commission might have about it, but please know that we're dying to get additional information on this, and it just has not all been released from the state. What we do know is that the formula for that distribution of approximately $350 to $4 million in funds for this first round of CARES Act funding will go to counties in Kansas per the distribution amount set by the federal government to what went to Sedgwick and Johnson counties, which was $194 per person. I'm not sure which census numbers they're going to use for Douglas County's population distribution yet, but by any count, the amount of funds that would be distributed are substantial. Right now our estimates are somewhere between 21 to 24 million, depending on how they view, how they set up the population estimate. That's how the first 350 will be distributed. That money will be 50-50 is what they're saying. So 50% of those funds we will receive upfront to allow us to infuse into our community rapidly. And the remaining 50% we will have to account for and I think prepare a project plan for approval by the state and then be reimbursed for. The last 50 million that of the CARES Act funding, the governor's office has labeled it COVID impact factor. So if there are particular states or particular counties in Kansas that had higher COVID impact factors, which will relate to cases and unemployment, they're eligible for that last 50 million. Johnson County and Sedgwick County are also eligible for that last 50 million. The key here is that they want these funds to go to taxing entities, to local governments to do this work. They're telling us that right now that these need to be spent towards strengthening the health of our communities. That is the level of specificity I have at this point. And so as we learn more about how these funds should be directed and the different ways we could use them, I will certainly be preparing that information and sharing it with the county commission as well as our community partners on how to do that. They want these funds to be used rapidly. Because this is the first round of CARES Act funding, we're hearing that these funds need to either be spent or obligated. I am unclear if it is which of those it is at this point. between this year. So sometime between October and December, we need to have these funds allocated. And then any funds that we are unable to spend would be then returned to the state to be used in the third round of CARES Act funding. At the Spark committee conversations this week, there was a lot of conversation with that group about how CARES Act 2 would be structured. And I believe the intent there is to focus on economic development with public and private partnerships. And then round 3 would then focus on waiting for perhaps a possible resurgence of COVID this fall or later this year or early next year. So that's why the state is requesting that any unused funds be returned to them so that they could be put into the allocation to be spent later. This first round of CARES Act funding is approximately 39% of the total amount the state of Kansas has received from CARES Act funding. So it's a good chunk. And it's really heartening that the governor's office believes so strongly in the role of counties in Kansas to be able to distribute these funds and to make sure that we are in a position to help finance the health of our community. With that, I stand for any questions, knowing I may not have a lot of answers at this point.
Well, and Sarah, just to let you know, we got that your update just before the meeting by email. So I haven't had a chance to review your update just yet or read anything about that. So
sorry about that. And we will certainly get it added to our agenda so the public will be able to see that tomorrow. We'll add that to the memo. But basically the synopsis is what I just said, as well as the press release from the governor's office on CARES Act funding round 1.
So Sarah, just a quick question, and this may not be something you can answer, but so specifically it says strengthen the health of our communities. And of course that can mean an awful lot of things. Is it is all supposed to relate back to this COVID event or health in general? Or do you know?
I would say that it is to relate to COVID and
Okay.
but that's a wide,
It's huge.
Huge. Our ability to withstand epidemiological and infectious disease and impacts a wide range of our functions,
Right.
as we've learned through this process over the last 80 to 100 days. So while it is important that it is focused on recovery from COVID and preparedness in that realm, I think there's a lot of I think there's going to be a lot of really valuable places where this money can be spent in our community.
Okay.
if there's no other questions for Sarah, we'll open it up to Commissioner Miscellaneous. Sarah, I would just ask for an update. At our last meeting, we talked about our jail and gave some direction to you. Do you have any updates on that? I know I've heard city commissioners, some by email, some by text, communicated that they are, I'm not sure excited, but they're willing to have the discussion and want to be engaged in this work. I just wondered if you had any updates for us on those 3 items.
I have reached out to the city manager as to how he would like to approach that request from the county commission to engage deeper into this work. We have not gotten an ability to work that out at this time. I would say we are both knee deep in budget preparations at this point in time. So I'm hopeful to be able to touch base with the city manager soon and talk about how that would move forward.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment on that? That this is the worst possible time to be adding such a huge request, and one that is fraught for all parties involved. But man, I don't know that we can treat this like a normal request. I think it's an urgent request. The same as our request of our partners on behalf of the jail that's facing a real crisis. So if that could be relayed to the city manager and whoever the powers that be might be who could help expedite that meeting, would be appreciated.
And I know Mayor Ananda talked at their meeting last night about, she gave the City Commission a bit of an update, and I appreciate her doing that from the information that was shared at CJCC. And I know all commissioners were at the CJCC meeting yesterday when it comes to racial inequalities at the jail. So, and not just within the jail, but within our entire criminal justice system. And, you know, that can't wait. I mean, that is happening today, and that needs to be at the forefront of our mind. We owe it to those populations. We owe it to our community more than just those populations. We owe it to our community to continue to discuss that and try to come up with solutions to balance, you know, to address those inequities. So I would just add that to the list of, they seem to be very engaged in talking about that. And if they're engaged, we're ready to listen. And I know times are busy, but we're ready.
I appreciate the commissioners holding us accountable for this work and keeping the heat on, and you should continue to ask those questions until we are able to deliver some plans on how we move forward. So please do not take my excuse of budget as some sort of excuse. We definitely know that this is, and we appreciate the commissioners' intention and direction behind this. So I'm confident we'll be able to get a plan together soon.
Thank you. Any other miscellaneous commissioner items? Okay.
No, I had my one, but I wanted to take advantage of Matthew being on the call still when I passed along the compliment about the county and Burton and all the great work. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Drees. Well, our next meeting is on Wednesday. I don't know that we have any joint meetings between, not joint meetings, but conflicts between now and then. Not conflicts, things we have to notice. I can't speak here at the end of our meeting. I'm not aware of any, so unless anybody else is, we are adjourned.